And so this is the process of risk management planning. Again, it's relatively new. I'd say 20 years ago, this was not happening. And it was only around 20 years ago that this became a formal process. Now, the risk management plan, and I'm using the European template simply because it's the one that I know. But as I say, the broad principles are the same wherever you do it in the world. Okay. Now, the plan is split into 7 sections. Some of them are a bit boring, so we're not going to talk about those. But what we are going to talk about are these 4. So there's the safety specification, the pharmacovigilance plan, plans for post-authorization efficacy studies, and risk minimization measures. The rest of it we're going to ignore because it's mostly kind of, well, it's dull. So the safety specification, this I think is possibly one of the most important parts of the risk management plan at the point of licensing, because it tells us, it puts together everything that we already know about the treatment. So it talks about all of the things that we found out in the preclinical toxicity testing. What do we know about pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics? And so there will be things that we can then think about because of that information, trying to guess what might the effects of the medication be. It'll also talk about how we think that the treatment will be used. So what sorts of patients are we hoping will become exposed to the drug? It'll talk about the adverse event profile. So that's what do we already know? And this is your common adverse reactions, the 1 in 100, fairly common things that we've already seen. It may also consider class effects. So if this is the 2nd or the 3rd treatment within a class, and others have already been marketed, then you could also talk about what do we already know about this class of medications based on other drugs in the same class. It'll talk about either potential or known drug interactions, so interactions between treatments and problems that that might have. But it'll also give us a level of confidence with which we should interpret this information. Okay. It'll tell us about the population that was included in the randomized trials. So it'll give us a detailed breakdown of the sorts of patients who were included, how long that they were exposed to the treatment for, what doses were studied, but then really importantly, it'll also tell us who was not studied in the randomized trials. So did you have any children in the trial? Did you have any really elderly people? And the important thing is, you can then link this with how will it be used? Because within this same document, you will talk about who you expect to be exposed over time. And it could be that the who wasn't studied forms a large part of who you think it will be used in. And this is really useful information. So from these 2, we will generate safety concerns, okay? We'll also have information about the disease itself. So the indication for the treatment, what's the epidemiology of that disease? What other diseases or illnesses does the expected population suffer? And this is then going to help us to interpret these safety concerns. And we split these into 3 bits of information. So we have important identified risks. So this is which adverse reactions do we know are definitely associated with the drug and that we maybe need to investigate further. We have important potential risks. These may be theoretical adverse reactions that we haven't observed yet, but that we think we should be looking for because we know, based on maybe the pharmacokinetics and the preclinical toxicology, to expect that there could be a problem. So we call these potential risks. And then finally, we have missing information. This is important missing information that, based on all of this, we might say we really need to know what happens to people who've taken the treatment for more than 2 years because we think maybe there's a chance that it could cause a cancer. Well, we won't have seen that in the trials because people won't have had time to develop the cancer. Or it may be that we want to know what happens in a particular population, so people with renal failure, what happens in them. So we would call that missing information. Okay, so hopefully that's clear about what goes in the safety specification and why we would find that useful. Yeah? Okay. So knowing what we do about the safety profile, we would then put together a pharmacovigilance plan. And I should mention the body that puts together this whole risk management plan is the drug company. So the company that wants the license for the treatment does all of this work, which we then present to the regulatory authority to see if they agree. Okay. So the pharmacovigilance plan is another really important part of this dossier because it talks about how we will then address the safety concerns. For sure, it will involve routine pharmacovigilance. So spontaneous reporting is always going to be a given. It will always be a part of this process. But two other really important parts are studies to investigate either identified or potential risks of the medication. And these are things that the company themselves can propose to do, but similarly, the regulatory authority could insist that the company does these studies as a part of the license. So it's possible that the company will be refused a license unless they commit to doing one of these studies. It's also important if we've got risks that we know about and we want to try to minimize those risks. So a really good example would be if we know that a treatment could cause a birth defect, then we may have a pregnancy prevention plan for that drug. So it would be really important to know how well is that plan working. So it would be then a study to investigate that risk minimization.